Is it just easy? I went too fast.
All right, we're gonna get started here in a second if folks can make their way. Can you, Jessica on Zoom, can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you great.
Okay. All right. Hope you all had a good lunch. So we're going to jump right in. We have a little bit of a tight schedule for the next couple of panels. And so apologies in advance if you don't all get to have time to ask your questions at the end, but I would encourage you to seek out the speakers afterwards if they're still around and or like follow up with them by email. The next panel, the focus is on energy justice and infrastructure equity. And this panel is going to be moderated by Professor Doug Houston from the UCI Department of Urban Planning and Public Policy. So I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hi, everyone. As she said, I am Doug Houston. I'm so glad to see all of you and to be invited to be here with you. I think as moderator, what I can do is introduce each speaker before they present. That way it'll all be fresh on your mind. So with that, I'll introduce Elisa Borowski. She joined our faculty in July. She is faculty in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. I'm very happy and pleased to say she is a part of our cluster hire program with the Black Thriving Initiative on campus. And our cluster focuses on infrastructure equity. I'm the faculty lead on that. So glad that we are able to recruit her to campus. Her research focuses on identifying how social forces contribute to travel behavior and decision-making during mobility disruptions and applying that knowledge in the design of community-based transportation solutions that facilitate social cohesion and connectedness. They received their PhD in civil and environmental engineering from Northwestern University with a specialization in transportation systems and planning. Their dissertation examined social mechanisms for resource access, including sharing and the use of technology-supported crowdsourcing during emergencies and disasters. They also have a Master's of Science of Civil Engineering with a focus on structures and materials and a Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology with a second major in English from the University of New Mexico. And with that, welcome, and we look forward to your talk.
Well, thank you everyone for being here today. I'm honored to have been asked to be a part of this amazing event. My name is Elisa Borowski. I'm an assistant professor here. I started in July in civil and environmental engineering. I need to click on a particular. So to begin, I just wanted to give a quick overview of the brand here at UC-Urban. So I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and that's where I pursued my bachelor's and master's degree. First in anthropology and English, as I mentioned, and then I took a lot of time off school and came back. So I did structural engineering, thinking I wanted to design bridges, and then realized I wanted to do something a little bit more human-centered, behavioral. I went straight from there to Northwestern, where I did my PhD and picked up the second master's along the way in transportation systems analysis and planning. I graduated last December, and then over the summer came out here as a professor as an intern. So today's presentation, I'm just going to give a very quick sampling of a lot of different projects that I've worked on, all related to mobility, resilience, and equity. So two of the projects of my dissertation research are looking at how people have accessed rides and how people have accessed social support. Some ongoing research is looking at access to food and healthcare. And then I'm just starting a project here looking at access to energy or specifically cooling. And some of the things that you'll notice is I'm interested in looking at how people can source resources from the crowd. And we see that the impacts of that are quite different if we're looking at for-profit versus nonprofit. And then also during the pandemic, I became really interested in how virtual may or may not be a substitute for physical access, and then how these community located and operated hubs can be a good way to help access to resources. So overall, the kind of framework of my dissertation is all focused on resilience, how people prepare for, respond to, and recover from disruption events. I started by looking at evacuation behavior because I was in transportation. That was the main disruption I focused on. And then during the pandemic, focusing on that as the disruption. And I'm currently looking at how we get resources to people and people's resources. And resources can be a wide variety of things with rides, food, even information. And then thinking about people not as just an individual decision maker or actor, but how we are part of, we have multiple different identities, we're part of multiple different communities, and social networks and all of these things impact how we move or can move around in our daily life. When we think about how we are getting resources to people during an emergency, we often think about these governmental processes like FEMA and Red Cross. But my work focused mostly on more like emergent spontaneous social responses. So sourcing from the crowd, sharing with your neighbors, and also how we're spreading networks. So for the first study looking at access to rides, this is one of my more traditional studies using a big data set. So back in 2019, Chicago released a data set looking at ride sourcing trips that originated across the city, Uber, Via, and Lyft. And for the first year of that data set, I matched these requests for rides across the city with unplanned disruptions that happened on a real transit line. And what I'm showing here is at Belmont Station. So the baseline, how many rides were typically hailed in that area of the rail station compared to when there was a disruption in the rail transit that day. And in this case, we see that it was as much as like 8 times as many rides hailed during that like 2-hour window this disruption. But that wasn't the case for all of the city. So I did this multi-level model and pulled in factors related to the station itself, the community area that it was located in, and then the city project that was located in. And the main findings from the study is that we do see that ride hailing is used to fill these unplanned gaps, as in the case of the Belmont Station, but it was statistically significantly more in areas that had a greater percentage of white residents and in areas with higher income, as you might expect. And so it seems like this crowdsourcing, when it's for profit, like a ride hailing company, is not necessarily an equitable strategy for increasing resilience. So next, moving on to this study of how people are accessing social support. This was a study that I did after 1 year of lockdown, focusing on young adults. So this was a survey. It had just 300 respondents, ages 18 to 34 in 3 different states. The survey had a lot of different components. One of the unique components that I want to point out was that we had this place generator. So we also had a name generator, which is pretty typical in sociological studies, where you're asked to name 5 or 10 people you turn to for help or assistance. And the place generator is asking what are the top 5 places you go to in a typical day. And this was prior to the pandemic lockdown and then different attributes of those places. And so the results from this study, we really were looking at how changes in how people were using space, so third places, virtual spaces, and outdoor spaces, because during the lockdown, that was the way to socialize, all had an impact on the social connection. And then what was that? Young adults' mental health. So our outcome variable here that we were looking at was negative. So for using factor analysis, our third places were actually in two separate categories. So one of the factors we labeled civic resource third places, and these were libraries, communities, and places of worship. While another factor was commercial third places, and these were coffee shops, restaurants, and bars. And so these had different sociodemographic groups that were more significantly correlated with this reduction. For this, I want to focus, I guess, mainly on virtual spaces, and whether that is a good substitute for physical access. In this case, we see that women and non-binary respondents were more likely to be dissatisfied with using virtual spaces as a way to connect socially. And then the outdoor areas were also more dissatisfying for youth class and Asian young adults. These also load onto or correlated with dissatisfaction with friendships, which was kind of our strong tie metric, and reduction in weak social ties from workplace generator. And then many of these loaded directly onto negative mental health outcomes, including both dissatisfaction with social connection as well as reductions in workplaces and virtual spaces. Okay. I think I have to go a little bit faster, but basically what I want to say from this is that we found that for a variety of different historically marginalized genders, races, and sexual orientations, as well as intersections of those identities of lower income, tended to be correlated with reductions in visits or satisfaction with these places, both physical and virtual, reductions in social support, and reductions in health. So what we can take away from this is that virtual access may not be an excellent substitute for physical access among certain in this case, and for certain activities like also in this specific case. So some ongoing research that I'm still seeing on colleagues at Northwestern University. One is looking at access to food. So during the pandemic, there was this nonprofit in Houston, Texas called Crowdsource Rescue. That use technology to map requests for help and offers volunteers to help in real time, and also partnered with a food bank to help get households that were in need of food delivered to their door. So we can see we have 2 years of data of where these requests were happening across Houston, and we've also marked them with different events that were occurring. So you can see right at the start of this day at the pandemic, there's a huge peak in requests for food, and then also after like the winter storms in 2021, we see another big peak there. So not only is it responding to the pandemic itself, but also these overlapping disasters and hazards that were co-occurring. So some of the findings from this, without going into too much detail, is that when we look at where the requests were happening, both during the lockdown and then after reopening, we see that there are more requests in areas that have, I guess, like predictive or standard indicators of vulnerability, or especially food insecurity in this case. And so for this, again, we use factor analysis. We weren't looking at just a single indicator of vulnerability, but how these cluster together and correlate with increased requests for food. So these include things like areas that have a very high percentage of Black Americans, as well as not having insurance and having lower income. Okay, I think that's all of them have the answer to the question. But the main findings were that these climate disasters also resulted in a spike in demand for assistance. So similar to the right, aliens kind of just gapped them. And there were more areas with higher proportions of Black Hispanic residents, those individuals living in floodplains, and also those who are already enrolled in nutritional assistance programs. So this seems to show that in this case, where we're looking at a nonprofit crowdsourcing organization, This does seem to be more equitable and providing access to individuals who are more in need of assistance. So my fourth study here is looking at access to healthcare. These were focus groups that we conducted on west and south sides of Chicago and it was a quality analysis. So we did a content analysis of transcripts from 3 different sessions and looked at what themes we were learning most often. And I just share a couple of quotes that I thought were especially important for these sessions. So one person said, I don't have a car, and so when I'm very sick, I can't take all those buses. It's about 3 buses to get there, and it takes over an hour and a half. And being sick, you don't want to be like that, you know? And then we said, I'm old school. I'm one of whether I can use Zoom. I forgot to, I don't know if I remember this is so that was it. So I'm old school, I'm 101. I can use Zoom. If you want to do virtual appointments, I can do it. I don't like it, but if it's necessary, I can. A lot of people won't touch it. They miss appointments. They say that's the only way I can talk to my doctor. And then the last one, someone said, in our communities, we are so far behind near everything that we're always trying to play catch up to get where, to get to the basement. And I don't think that that works because every time we get to the basement, everyone else is something else. But I think that this in this case, it was speaking to telehealth, but I think this is applicable to so much of our infrastructure, especially thinking about electric vehicles and where that infrastructure is being placed and where investment is going. There are communities that just continue to be left behind. And so I think that this voices that really clearly. So the main findings here is that solutions to prioritizing autonomy as well as physical accessibility and then customized user-friendly technology. So one thing we were considering is maybe having kiosks located at community centers where older adults could using telehealth and kind of a more familiar community setting. And then these tailored community-focused solutions these community-focused solutions should be tailored with guidance from local experts and community advocates. So one thing we can take away from this is similar to the other study, virtual access may not be an equitable substitute for physical access, in this case among older adults and when it comes to accessing health care. And my final study that I'm just starting now here at UC-Irvine is looking at how people are accessing energy and cooling. So we are partnering with a resilience hub in Boyle Heights in LA called Boyle Experts Observatory. And this is a community centered organization that offers people doing everyday events, but it's also a place where people can come during extreme events. Access fueling, energy, Wi-Fi, food, all sorts of resources. It was started by someone at a nonprofit here in Climate Resolve, and we're also working in collaboration with them. And just for kind of a general context of where this is located, this is a map of the transit system in LA, and it's kind of a bit away from any rail transit. So considering that it's not very realistic to use transit to get to a resilience center like this, where you might need to go during an extreme heat event or a power outage, for example, we're looking at what alternatives people can use besides just their own car to access these resources. So we're interested in asking about potential solutions, like what the current feelings about public transit, rail, and bus are, as well as would like on-demand microtransit be a good solution? How about active mobility, e-scooters, e-bikes, as well as the infrastructure to support those? Maybe shared electric vehicles, but again, I'm looking at these electric solutions. Are they really sustainable? So finally, there's some key takeaways. Crowdsourcing can improve access to resources, but it's not always equitable, so we have to really think about for-profit solutions. Virtual access can fill some resource gaps, but it's not an ideal substitute for all activities or all people. Community-oriented operated resilience hubs, they provide an opportunity for sharing resources locally, but accessibility may still be a challenge. This is something that we're currently studying. And how this ties into the overall title of my talk these are more, a lot of these are disruptions rather than extreme events like a wildfire or a hurricane. But some of the trends that we're observing in these disruptions may be amplified during extreme events. So in conclusion, community-based mobility planning should support and integrate community strengths and assets that are already there. And this will require communication and collaboration between planners and the community. Thank you, and I'd be happy to take additional questions for you now.
Oh. So we have Professor Dominic Bednar. He also joined our faculty in July as part of our infrastructure equity cluster. He is faculty in the Department of Urban Planning and Public Policy, my home department. His research examines the institutional barriers of energy poverty recognition and response in the United States and explores the spatial, racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic patterns of socioeconomic patterns of residential energy affordability, consumption, and efficiency. His research also explores equitable and just pathways towards decarbonization and clean energy workforce development in Black and Brown communities. His body of work promotes ongoing policy analysis and program evaluation to improve community health and to effectuate a just energy transition. He completed his PhD in Environment and Sustainability at the University of Michigan School for the Environment and Sustainability, concentrating on energy justice. Dr. Bednar holds a BS in Civil Engineering from the University of Maryland and an MS in Natural Resources and Environment or Sustainable Systems from the University of Michigan. With that, I'm Dr. Bednar.
Okay. Test. Or I guess I have this. Can everyone hear me all right? Thumbs up, the folks in the back. Alrighty. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And so today, again, I'll be chatting about my research on the intersection of energy and justice, but specifically a multidimensional approach to how we recognize energy poverty and how we respond. And work through this will sound weird. But okay, so I like to start my presentations by asking an audience question. And so for the past 3 years, what is one word that really encapsulates your experience? You can just raise your hand, shout them out. Exhaustion. Inclusion. Planning. Okay, yes. Transformation. Chaos. Another transformation. What else? Blur. Growth. Grateful. Yes. Resilient. What else? Grief. Yes. Lots of it. What about some folks in the back area? Exploration. Overwork.
Underpaid.
Hot.
Wait, what was that last one?
You said underpaid.
Yes. Hot. Two more. Paradigm hyphen shift. Yes. One more. That's good. One more. One more time. Disparity. Yes. All right. So yes to all of those things, and crazy of me to ask you to give me an answer to one word for 3 years worth of experience. And I do this exercise as an example to just demonstrate the variability and the variety of responses that we all have that really encompass all the different experiences that we have. And so likewise with energy poverty, there's no one metric or there's no one word or no one form that can truly really capture the lived experience that people have. And ultimately we have to move to something that's more multidimensional, something that allows us to look at a number of different avenues of different. And so today, again, I'll be chatting about what is energy poverty and why its recognition matters. does recognition precede its responses? Then towards a multidimensional approach and why we also use a more targeted approach to better understand like what households are experiencing energy poverty. And finally, to close with transformation and talk about policy and future work. And so the first study, energy poverty and why its recognition matters. Millions of Americans experience energy poverty across the country, but specifically also across the globe. Today, I'll be chatting about from a United States context, where millions of Americans forgo food and medicine to pay energy bills, many falling so far behind they actually experience utility shutoffs. Many people live in inefficient homes. So consequently, their homes are either too hot or too cold. They can't properly regulate comfortable and vital temperatures in their homes. And finally, millions of Americans have broken heating equipment. Each of these particular dynamics are what we characterize as situations of energy insecurity. A shattering effect here in the United States as a racialized country is that Black folks are twice as likely to go behind in their utility bills and 3 times as likely to experience utility shutoffs. And energy poverty or energy insecurity disproportionately impacts the most vulnerable communities. Of course, as I mentioned, Black or African Americans, but also low-income populations, Latinx populations, Indigenous populations, and our elderly populations. And so again, the energy poverty is a really important issue to study, a really important issue to examine, but also a really important issue to really highlight and focus on our most vulnerable. So some of my previous work has looked at the spatial dimensions of energy poverty. This right here is showing the city of, let me see, can I get a marker? This thing. So this is Wayne County, Michigan. The city of Detroit is actually about right. And so you see the map on the left shows us that the oldest homes are clustered within the city of Detroit. New homes kind of on the outskirts, suburbs. And the map on the right is showing the overlay of household incomes. So again, those that are living in the oldest homes also happen to have the lowest income. When we overlay this with residential energy burden, which is percent expenditure that a household spends of their annual income on their energy bill, and you see that again, this quite literally overlays exactly with those again that are living in the lowest, that have the lowest incomes, that are living in the oldest homes. And again, these are primarily African American and Latinx populations. And so this study really helped us better understand that, like, where are these hotspots of highly energy inefficient homes, high consuming homes, but more importantly, the highest energy burdens. And so with that in mind, does recognition precede its response? And so a foundational part of my doctoral work was really interrogating this deep-rooted problem of how do we define what the problem is of energy poverty here in the United States. And this study also examined how we measure the problem, but also how we evaluate our solutions to the problem. And so looking at the problem space, but also looking at the solution space. And so here I have a flow diagram, if you will, that really helps us better understand that the challenge with energy poverty or defining energy poverty is that in the United States, there is no formal recognition of energy poverty. And so the argument that I make in my work is that without a formal definition of energy poverty, it really doesn't allow us to fully characterize the amount, extent, and causes of energy poverty in the United States. And consequently, it misguides how we measure the problem, and subsequently, this informs how we evaluate our solutions to the problem, which ultimately lead us down this path of what a lot of scholars say are path-dependent solutions, where you take a specific, or where you make a particular decisions down a particular path, and it makes it really hard to course correct and go down a more optimal path that might be able to help folks out. All of that is what I like to say is just doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Some people call that crazy. So to really unpack this research here, I start with the 1973-1974 oil crisis, where this was obviously before my time, but I have some elders and things that would tell me about in this moment how they were like crazy minded at the gas station, out of this one. I don't know, without your social security number or your license plate, one or the other. But in times of crises, we normally do our best to stockpile on resources. That way we can continue to deliver and support our own families. And so in that crisis, the state of Maine had this really innovative program called Project Fuel that had a particular focus on home weatherization. And home weatherization is essentially looking at how do we make homes more energy efficient, and so it allows them to retain the energy in their homes. So this program inspired a part of what was in the 1975 Energy Policy and Conservation Act, where yes, we have the strategic petroleum reserves, which we now still have and operate. So if there's any political crises, like we can release our own barrels of oil to help keep prices of energy much lower. But out of that came the Emergency Conservation Program, which was a national effort that focused on home weatherization. 1977, the Department of Energy was created, and then in 1979, the Emergency Conservation Program was converted into the weatherization program that was housed underneath of the Department of Energy. Out of the Department of Health and Human Services came this other program called the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Act, or the Low Income Home Energy Affordability Program, the LIHEAP, which truly had a focus on assisting those that were the most vulnerable. And this program essentially acts as a bill assistance program. And so these are the two programs that I'll be focusing on, is how the United States actually understands and recognizes poverty. And so for the LIHEAP program, again, housed in the Department of Health and Human Services, it's a bill assistance program, and the weatherization assistance program is the energy retrofit program that's housed in the Department of Energy. And so how each of these programs defines their eligibility is truly how we constitute a definition of energy poverty in the United States. So we recognize that people are falling behind in their utility bills. We recognize that people require energy efficiency assistance, but again, those definitions are baked within home eligibility or the eligibility for these particular programs. And it's either 150% of the federal poverty level or 200% for the weatherization program. How we measure the success of the program depends on, one, if we deploy those resources to a household that either has an elderly member, a very young child, or a person that has a disability. And for the weatherization program, it's truly an arbitrary number of how many things that we weatherize, and how we evaluate the solutions, or how we evaluate the effectiveness of these programs. The LIHEAP program hasn't had any national program evaluations, whereas the weatherization program has had several that help us really understand that energy efficiency is truly an effective path forward, but those evaluations really help us better understand the operations, cost effectiveness, but also non-energy benefits. And so I like to show this graph when I give this presentation. So this is a review of the data for the LIHEAP program on how those funds were actually used. And again, you can see here those measurements. Are we deploying resources to a household with a child? Are we doing so to a household that has a disabled member or any vulnerable member? Right here is actually elderly. And so it's about a 50-50 split with elderly. Just over 15% of households with young children receive assistance. And then about 35% are households with a disabled member. Here you can see the breakdown of how the funds are. So we saw that's okay. All right, Microsoft Power, it's the first one. Give it a minute. Maybe let me start. These things happen.
for technical difficulties. Yes.
Sure. I'll switch it.
All right, back to where we started. Thanks for your patience. Ooh, I like this. Okay, so before the technical difficulty, I was just talking about where this money is going. There's some for heating assistance, 44% prices. A lot of people allow some funds up to 25% can go to weatherization, planning, cooling. But the figure that I want you to look at here is this one, is that only 5% of the state income eligible population is served. And so despite that we have these metrics, despite that there is assistance that is available, there are still, I mean, what this says is that 95% of the people who qualify for this particular program are not receiving the assistance that they need. And so it speaks to the attention that is still required as far as how we actually support folks who are in need and who use energy for everything, maybe having lights, to heat up a home. At this point, internet is a necessity. How do we cook? And so energy is something that obviously, yes, it's within us, but it's also all over. And so my work draws from the United Kingdom and how they actually have taken leadership in formally recognizing this particular issue. In 1991, Brenda Boardman really coined this term called fuel poverty, which is the interplay of, she said it was the interplay of these three issues: low incomes, high fuel costs, and inefficiencies of a particular dwelling. And her dissertation at Oxford led to the formal establishment of this fuel poverty strategy, or this framework for future action, wherein they actually created a strategy that set targets for its implementation, but it also allowed them to actually measure at a national level where they're at, but also where they want to go. And so in lieu of a definition, my paper here put forth one that says it's an assemblage of the socioeconomic, technical, and environmental political factors. And so folks just simply not having access to energy that they. I think what's really important to note here is in the two programs, how much money is actually appropriated and deployed for each of those programs. This orange dotted line is the Lockheed program, where 85% of the total funding goes to. Here's the weatherization program. This little spike right here happened during the Obama era stimulus plan, where they really thought of this program as one that would, yes, support households and help them maintain energy in their homes, but it was also seen as a program that was able to facilitate huge job creations. And so what this graph really helps us understand is that our approach to energy poverty is like many approaches in this country are on short-term solutions or band-aid approaches and really helping people in the short term, but not as much in the long term. And so even though we have weatherized over 7 million homes since the mid-70s, 40 million folks remain income eligible for energy efficiency assistance. There are some folks at the Council for Energy Efficiency Economy that found that if we were able to increase energy efficiency for all low-income households, we would be able to reduce energy burdens by 25%, which again speaks to the importance, or truly another added benefit of home retrofits and weatherization is that, yes, it's supporting people's home, but it's also reducing the burden that they have their lives on. And so this study, in brief, really, I like to say AAA saves the day, DAE. It's a principal argument on access to adequate and affordable energy, but it interrogates a process. How do we define our problem or better target needs support? How do we assess the problems, better measure the extent that people are experiencing energy poverty? And finally, how do we evaluate our solutions to the problem? That way we can better understand how effective we are. And ultimately, this process ought to be something that is circular, something that we revisit, something that we might even redefine what energy poverty looks like in 10, 20, 100 years. And so people all over organize for the support of energy poverty. I like this sign here, says mothers don't eat, so children eat. I'm gonna move along, we only have maybe 5 minutes. And so in the same light of like this recognition preceded its response, this was my final chapter of my dissertation that was published this year. It was really looking at recognition and response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And some scholars at Indiana University, they did a study in the in the first few weeks of the pandemic and found that those that are low income, Black, Latinx, and that require use of electronic media, medical devices, live in more energy inefficient homes. These folks here at the Biological Diversity Center put out a report, Powerless in the Pandemic, and I think they since put out a second report, but they found that if there was a nationwide ban on evictions and utility shutoffs for the period between March and November 2020, we would have been able to reduce COVID infections by nearly 9% and deaths by nearly 6%. And so in this particular study, really talking about the importance of consumer protections or shutoff protections, or as I'll share later, what I call energy protections. And so as it stands before the pandemic, and I think as we have today, there are a number of date-based protections. And so within a certain date range, utility is not legally allowed to disconnect your utility bill or disconnect your service from the utility or your power service. There are a few temperature-based, and but if the temperature outside is either too hot or too cold, they can't disconnect you. For folks who have disabilities, elderly provisions, medical provisions, and also some folks have payment plan deferrals. So as you see, none of these numbers say like 50, right? Like this isn't across the board. And so this particular study is to really unpack that, but within the perspective of the pandemic. So the questions I look at are, what is the response time and authorization level of existing and COVID era energy protections? And what type of energy protections were deployed in response to the COVID-19? And so I looked at 25 major cities, specifically, most of the cities that I looked at were investor-owned utilities. I think maybe a few of them were utilities. But how I went about this was I used a content analysis on recent press releases, commissioner orders, governor directives, to again better understand what I have characterized as these resiliency responses with regard to energy access, energy burden, and payment assistance. And so in each of these categories, I look to see if they suspended service disconnections, did they reinstate service for customers that were previously disconnected from payment, do they have a medical exemption policy? Financially, did they waive all the reconnection fees? Did they suspend the accrual of late fees? And for payment assistance, do they offer loan payment assistance or offer some sort of, flexible payment assistance program? And so for the authorization level, this is whether or not the states or the Public Utility Commission mandated that a utility company prevent shutoffs, or was it something that voluntarily had to happen from the ground up with regard to utility companies? And as you can see here, we have the voluntary states, and so I kind of tracked their first action based off of the World Health Organization's pandemic declaration. And so how many days after did it take for either the states or the utility companies to actually make a decision? This graph right here kind of shows like the total, but I think this right here is a better graph. And so here we have all of the 25 cities. Here are the total number of protections across each of them from lowest to highest. And then this is the average amount of protections. Here I think is really interesting to overlay is the percent of households that have low income energy burdens. And so as you can see here for Birmingham, Alabama, they have an over 10% energy burden, but have out of these 25 cities have the lowest number of protections that were deployed during. This one right here is the median household energy burden. And then this graph right here, I think is pretty cool because it shows us proportionally based off of the population of each of those cities, what their particular responses look like. So for here, for LA, it's a little larger, but nearly comparable to the population of Chicago, had less responses than what Chicago had. Similarly here for San Jose and Richmond. And it really just helps us, better understand across the country for different varying cities have obviously various jurisdictions and political leadership and how those particular decisions affect and influence residents who are, again, like we're all responding to the same crises. And so in short, response times were different between mandatory and voluntary. Reporting, energy protections varied across the country, and we characterize a suite of residential energy protections as energy resiliency responses. And as I close, this was the map kind of like before that shows actively fired and voluntary shutoffs. This was a few months after. I can see most of them have essentially gone away. And we're kind of back in business as usual in that first slide that I showed with the existing protections. And so these are, all really a motivation for us to really move toward the space where one, we have formal recognition of energy poverty, but doing so in a multi-dimensional way. And so here I show energy moving from the power plant to our home, but we have these leads in the system. Where technical is looking at the dwelling characteristics. And so yes, the efficiency of the home is important, socioeconomic characteristics, thinking about yes, household income, but also household characteristics. More people living in a house normally means there's significant energy. And then also the environmental policy decisions are different, as I've shown in the previous slides, but also like decisions here in California are different than decisions in, let's say, Michigan. And taking all of those really with this perspective, with the risk assessment, trying to understand our residential energy vulnerability, that helps us better understand how are these assessed in terms of like how risky are they to threaten environmental treasure assets. Energy vulnerability really is this spectrum. Let's understand like what's the likelihood that people would fall into energy poverty. And in closing, we need a national energy poverty strategy that encompasses definitions and metrics, and specifically reduction-based goals and that are focused on our health and well-being. Solutions that are, of course, like community-centered, community-engaged, community-driven. And finally, we need more effective targeting. And with that,
Next up, we have Dr. James Adams. He's a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Anthropology at UCLA. Adams's research examines the multi-scalar dynamics of socio-technical change and considers their implications for developing more just and effective modes of environmental and energy governance. His publications and teaching engage current debates in energy and environmental ethics, experimental ethnography, and the politics of knowledge production. Recent publications include knowledge infrastructure and research agendas for quotidian, thank you, Anthropocenes, and what is energy literacy? Cool, thanks.
Okay, can everyone hear me all right? Okay. Be loud. Yeah. But y'all forgive me, I'm almost losing my voice. These Santa Ana winds are definitely driving me out, but we'll do the best we can. Okay, so as you just heard, I'm a cultural anthropologist of science, technology, and the environment. And one of the ways that I like to describe what I'm interested in, I like to study, or one of the things that I study, are the way that complex environmental problems are often shaped, at least in part, by the same systems that have produced those problems to begin with. And so today my goal is to share a little bit about how that has happened by looking at the Texas power crisis of 2021. Now, to be forthright, I'm not a scholar of disaster inherently. My dissertation was looking at how Austin, Texas was mobilizing collective efforts to transition their energy system away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. But as this happened during the course of my research, it actually became a prominent focus as I pivoted with the world that was pivoting around me. That said, I'm going to also try to conclude by pointing in a more hopeful direction for thinking about how we might continue to develop and think about the development of more just and sustainable energy systems moving forward. Okay, so Texas grid failure. So in February of 2021, a complex interplay of factors coalesced in a symphony of disasters that left much of Texas without power and water for days on end. As many of you may know, hotter than usual polar temperature enabled an Arctic winter storm system to dislodge from the North Pole and move south across the southern United States, including Texas. And given that Texas doesn't usually experience this level of cold, the Texas grid was woefully unprepared. But beyond the mere abnormality of the icy winds that froze up Texas's energy infrastructure, all of which could have been made to function at these temperatures, if it had only been designed to do so. This grid failure became iconic as uniquely Texan. As the outages rolled on, what became apparent was how the disastrous dimension of this disaster was exacerbated by Texas's critical interdependencies and over-reliance on fossil fuels, or on natural gas in particular, by an ethos of Texas exceptionalism and emphatic faith in market logics as a form of energy governance, and by the structural racist legacies of Jim Crow that still segregate and disadvantage people of color in the state to this day. So in the midst of the storm, actually around near the peak of the storm, those who still had power managed to circulate this image, and it quickly went viral on social media, raising serious concerns about the equity of the emergency response efforts by the state. And it gained so much traction that the city of Austin and Tarrant County actually included the image in their after action review and findings report. And so I'm going to read a little bit, quote some from this report for you to show you how they framed it. So in these comments, the city was sure to note that East Austin, which is the city's historically black neighborhood, is shown here on the left in complete darkness, while by opposition, the city's business district is shown completely lit up, hinting at some inequities there. But then they quickly proceeded to mention how, and I'm quoting here, multiple neighborhoods, including historically affluent communities, experience power outages, not just East Austin, and that rather essential services simply relied on maintaining electricity to downtown and the Capitol complex. The officials also stated how they had urged other downtown complexes to conserve their energy, but in the end, they did also admit that this did little to quell the opinion, and they did say to counter opinions that residents of limited means endured the brunt of the storm's impacts. And while I'm not saying that this was their goal, if their goal was at all conciliatory, I would say they missed their mark by a wide margin. And it's not that I or the other people who were circulating these images were trying to suggest, as the city seems to be saying, that the independent system operators were intentionally targeting Black East Austinites to spare wider, more affluent neighborhoods. But intentions and opinions aside, the death tolls from the storm show disparities, right? And in fact, one study by Carlo and colleagues found that communities of color were 4 times as likely to experience a sustained outage than their more predominantly white communities. And that was both controlling for other factors like average income of these neighborhoods or proximity to critical infrastructure, both of which are decided by the city as other possible communities. So, in the aftermath of this incident, as I tried to make sense of the incident, of the image I just showed you, and then the way that the city and the county were framing this incident, I was reminded by a poignant turn of phrase by Lauren Ross, who is a local environmental justice activist in Austin. And while I heard from Lauren Ross, she credited it to an indigenous activist that she met at Standing Rock. And I'll read you the quote. There was an indigenous woman at Standing Rock who talked about whiteness as a measure of the distance from the violence that it takes to support our lives. And she said we need to become a lot more aware of that hidden violence. Well, this line has long stuck with me. Whiteness as a measure of the distance that it takes to reproduce our lives. And to me, what this image really does capture is that hidden violence, right? A dispersed yet ever-present violence that was in no way, shape, or form created by the storm, but merely revealed by it. And in turn, this narrative touted by the state and the county is precisely that distance that whiteness affords. Okay, so in the rest of this talk, I'll be discussing some of the issues that enabled the disaster, the Texas power crisis to persist and transpire along with its inequities in the way that it did. And in doing that, I'll be also trying to build towards a distinction that I've been playing with in a few of my recent papers, building off of the work of one of my mentors at the University of North Texas, Maggie Brown, who writes on transistance instead of resistance as a theory and frame for queer liberation. So while he's working against resistance, I'm also thinking about transistance instead of transition here. And the main point that I want to emphasize is that while transition suggests a more utopian view of environmental justice as something to be achieved at some point in the future, transistence is about creating relations in the here and now. And in that sense, it does not assign justice to some imagined future for the experts to draft up and to figure out how to realize it. Instead, transistence is about the dirtier, the messier, and arguably more difficult challenge of developing ethical relations within our current societies in full view of their persistent injustice disparities. So in short, transistence asks us not how we cross over the whiteness as a distance separating the present from a future utopia, but rather, how do we build relations that overcome these distances in the here and now to begin to create justice within a patently unjust world? Okay, so a few different types of this distance, right? So one form that I was writing about is infrastructural distance. Okay, and so this image here are the three grids in the United States. Some of you might have known this after the disaster. Nobody knew this before the disaster. I talk to people all the time, and nobody knew this, and they would all just be surprised. Now some of you might know. But there are three grids. There's the Western connection, there's the Eastern connection, and then there's Texas. And gives you a little bit of, in the long history of Texas exceptionalism, the ERCOT grid, which is the Texas grid, has about 5 DC ties that connect it to surrounding grids. But there's actually very limited capacity to bring in energy across these ties. And so in that sense, Texas actually functions and is run more like an island system, right? So like Hawaii or New Zealand, where there's no capacity to bring in extra energy. But another difference between Texas and these island grids is that they're usually forced to run with about a 30 to 40% margin, right? So it's quite a cushion, given that if an asset falls online or demand quickly spikes, they can sort of accommodate for that, right? By contrast, Texas doesn't have a capacity market, and so it runs with a very thin marginal reserve, usually at about 12%, so less than half of these other island grids, right? And that is because this creates a really volatile market, which creates the potential for lots of gains and lots of losses. To just give you a hint of this volatility, the average price of a megawatt hour is $22. The cap is $9,000, right? So it gives you a little bit of a hint at how much that price value can change. So you might ask, well, what is the design here? Why didn't Texas interconnect? Well, by limiting the amount of power that actually crosses state borders, Texas has managed to limit federal oversight over its power system. And so it was this actual desire for this autonomy and this Texas exceptionalism and the idea of wanting to be more autonomous than the rest that did granted this sort of unheard of sense of political autonomy over its power system. But at the same time, it dramatically decreased its capacity to provide safe, secure, equitable access to energy for its residents. And this became most evident and clear with the Texas power crisis in 2021. Okay, moving back down to Austin for a second. This city plan on the left is the 1928 city plan. It's the first city plan in Austin, and it's the origin of that east-west split that I described earlier. And so this is the plan where racial segregation was first coded into city policy in Austin, where Black and brown residents were only granted access to public schools and public infrastructure on the east side of the city. Secondly, the east side of Austin is also located in the Blackland Prairie, right, which is considered a much less vulnerable landscape than Austin's west side, which is over the Edwards Aquifer. So the west side is over a karst formation over the aquifer. It's also home to some of the more charismatic species that inhabit these rare dwellings. And so a lot of Austin's environmental movement, which is well known for, has been west focused, right? And so along with this social and racial divide, there's also been a divide of consideration that environmentalism is looking westward and social issues and social problems are looking eastward. In classic environmental racist form, East Austin was also designated as mixed use. And so to protect a lot of the Western environmental vulnerable environments, the location of petro storage facilities, of manufacturing, of waste management, and recycling were all in different times, in different ways, in different places, located in East Austin, subjecting their Black and brown residents to a dramatically disproportionate amount of air pollution and other forms of pollution. So once again, the distance that from the violence that it takes for our lives. So scaling up a little bit here, this is once again at the Texas scale. On the far right, what we see, this is a map of the oil and gas leases owned by the University of Texas system. And so the University of Texas has actually been really, really good at taking that money from the oil and gas and using it to develop programs and infrastructure that draws in capital to make partnerships with tech. And these oil and gas assets have been fundamental to the development of Austin and the Silicon Hills, right? And so its high-tech industry is largely actually rooted in a very conscious effort to diversify their economy through the reinvestment of oil profits after the oil birth of the bubble in the 1980s. And interestingly enough, and I trace this out in more detail in my dissertation, the roots of Austin's renewable energy tech are also tied back to this history of gaining profits from fossil fuels. And also here on the left, we have a map produced by the EPA showing cancer rates that are from pollution related to the oil and gas industry. And you can see Austin is in the white, and where all of their oil and gas drilling and where a lot of the money from which they're benefiting is coming from is deeply in the red. So once again, just painting a sense of that distance. And then I just quickly wanted to comment, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that this spatial pattern from city to state also has a global component, right? It's reproduced. And here in the West of the United States, we are benefiting from the manufacturing and the pollutive industries that are more predominantly located in the global South. Okay, now to think a little bit about temporal distance. So Austin is well known for its art, music, and cultural scene. It's also valued for its uniquely beautiful geography with its rolling hills, ample springs and water resources, and rich and diverse vegetation. And what I'm showing you a bit here is it's also had the reputation for being weird. And that being is that it's a liberal oasis in Texas, which is the Sea of Red. It's also been at the tip of the sphere of the environmental movement in Texas for a long time. And it also has a rich, cultural scene, music, all these things that sort of make it very distinct from a lot of the other big cities, prominent metropolitan areas in Texas. But what is not often so much appreciated is how these attractions and identities are rooted in a settler colonial project of empire, and very deeply and closely rooted in that project, as well as its tactics of genocide and ethnic cleansing. So this is a screenshot that I took from Native Lands, and the reason why I included it here is because of the impressive overlap of all these different indigenous communities that consider Austin, the Austin landscape, as their ancestral homelands. And so that includes the Tonkawa, the Apache, the Isleta del Sur Pueblo, the Live Band Apache, the Texas Band of Yaqui Indians, and the Coquiltecans. And before Mirabeau V. Lamar, who is Texas, the second president of the Republic, decided to relocate the capital to Austin, this area was actually rather sparsely populated by Anglo settlers. And many people were against this idea of the relocation because they were questioning Lamar's logic for locating the capital at the edge of the frontier, where it was vulnerable to raids, invasion, and had very little economic prospects. But Lamar had a dream of an Anglo-Texan empire to the west. 2 minutes? Okay, trying to, I will wrap this up quickly. Okay. So Lamar had a dream of an Anglo-Texas empire to the west. And while that never manifested, what he did actually succeed at was naming Austin as the capital of the state of Texas, and he locating it at that edge of the frontier, and also tended to self-select settlers who were also wealthy, who were adventurous and industrious and had their own ideas of grandeur. And Austin began to market itself and market those distinctions and brand itself as weird, as separate, as different from Texas from its very beginnings. And real quick, this was a slide that was used by a local organizer to tie this colonial history to the present. So here we have showing that Austin is usually ranking at the top of lists of best places to live in the United States, while the image on the right is best for whom. Because while Austin is growing in its tech clusters, while it's maintaining its spaces of white recreation, it's also the only city of its size to be losing its black and brown population share at the rate that it is. And it has been every decade since the 1920s, with that first master plan. So tying as many indigenous folks will say, colonization didn't happen. It's not a thing of the past. It's something that we are still a part of. It's still happening here, and with the same effect, similar effect of displacing black and brown people from their home. Okay, so to try and tie all this back together, it might be tempting to see the climate crisis as being caused by extractivism, by fossil fuels, or by greenhouse gases, just like it might be tempting to understand the Texas power crisis as itself being caused by climate change or by Winter Storm Uri. But what this narrative leaves out is that these events and these processes are but the latest and grandest scale expressions of a colonial and capitalist disaster that's been happening for centuries. And it's patently obvious to me that a renewable energy transition, if it reproduces the same kinds of distances that mask the everyday violence of our petrocultural society, it is also capable of reproducing its discontents in the form of ecological destruction and environmental justices. Sorry. Thus, in my book, we should look to trade a focus on transitioning to future techno-fantastic energy systems, and trade that for a focus on transisting the settler colonial and racial capitalist relations of power, which are the same relations that enable these systems to take hold and become settled in the first place. Thank you.
So thanks for those great talks. We're gonna have to really cut short the Q&A, unfortunately. So I think we'll just be able to take a few questions.
We have 5 minutes, folks, and I know you've got some questions, so feel free to hand and jump in there, maybe. See a hand, yes. Say what you said.
Yeah, I had a question. Well, I have multiple questions. So to Dr. Bednar and Adams, I was curious what you think about how things like smart grid technology and some of the more interesting technological advances will affect energy access and equity. Just if you had any thoughts on that. And then for the first presenter, Dr. Borowski, I was wondering, did you see anything related to like peak pricing when it came to how those changed access when disruptions happen?
Okay. Does this work? Yes. Short answer, yes. Yes, I think smart grids have the potential to support increased accessibility to energy. I just, of course, caution just like what is our approach to how we do that work and who are we centering in those approaches and who are we including in the processes? And I missed the second question, but
Yeah, so I would agree. That it has a potential. So like for instance, one of the organizations that I worked with and studied in Austin, Solar Austin, had a program which provided, solar installations, but with, a very pointed effort that it was, it was piloting new technologies with and selecting certain communities with the goal of improving equity and providing supplemental power to help decrease their energy bills. And so if it's done in a way where equity is the goal from the beginning, and the allocation of resources has that intent from the beginning, and it's done with an organization that has been working on these issues and understands the communities, then I think it definitely could have impacts on equity and improve equity. Otherwise, if we think that just if we develop the tech that is going to solve things, I think that there's a high chance that we're going to reproduce the inequities.
Okay, if I understood the question correctly, it was, did I see an effect of peak pricing on the shift to ride hailing during the transit disruptions? Is that the study? Yeah, so for that, the data that was publicly available in Chicago was so scrubbed, I guess you could say, that the pricing was rounded, the price per mile of a ride was rounded so much that I don't think we were really picking up on differences. We did try to include it in the model and it wasn't statistically significant, but I think that might be more to do with the quality of the data itself.
Okay, everybody, big fellow. My question is for Dr. Borowski. One of your studies mentioned non-binary people and someone who identified as such. I really appreciate you doing that. It's one of the few studies that I actually see include us in them. So my question was more towards how did it feel to include a population that's often excluded in studies, and also pushback from like people who are really interested in methods or reviewers and things like that.
And could you repeat which identity did you say? Non-binary? Yeah, of course. Thanks for that question. I felt good to be able to include it. The fact that my advisor supported the fact that I wanted to include that in the survey. We asked different experts in that area how to best word that question, so we're careful about wording it. And we also, I think, intentionally focused on a younger population because we imagined that they would be more open to that kind of question. So actually, among the 300 respondents, everyone answered the question. We had an option to say prefer not to answer, and everyone responded. So that was really encouraging. I think that the reviewers, they did have recommendations for how exactly we were including it in the model, but no one said like,
it's too small, you have to take it out. I think all the reviewers appreciated that we were trying to include this identity in the model. So yeah, I think it was a really positive experience. Yeah.
Question on, for all the panelists on like how are you engaging like critical frameworks, being that your work is centered around energy justice? You know, like energy STEM focus. So how do you include that theoretical framework and, you know, highlight those things that are often left out of discussions around STEM issues?
Thank you for the question. So a lot of my work really draws on the energy and environmental justice movement. And so I centered like the aspects of like distributional justice, procedural justice, recognition justice in the work that I'm doing. With, I think now the work that I'm doing, the work that I plan to continue to do in the future, particularly focus on like the procedural justice aspect or process justice. And as my colleague here was mentioning, it's like as you're working with communities, like to check in with them on how things are worded or like what type of information that they recognize that their community has and how that could be helpful in the transformation of their lives, the transformation of existing systems, and how that particular type of work done in concert in the academy can be things that can be fruitful for transformation.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I tried to actually, so like whiteness as a distance, right? That was something that I got from a local Austin environmental justice activist. I also tried to use concepts and ideas and discussions from Dave Fortes, who's another EJ activist, local, and Dr. Tanya Ward, who was fundamental to the anti-racism training for community climate planners. And so a lot of the critical frameworks that I tried to work with were actually coming from my field site. That said, I did put those into conversation with ideas that I found similar in the literatures that I read and that I'm conversant with in the discourses of anthropology. But I tried to find ways that the issues that I was studying being talked about and concepts that were used amongst the interlocutors that I was discussing with in Austin, and then trying to find like productive ways of putting those into contact with other concepts and ideas in the front conversations that I'm having in the academy.
I'll be brief because at first I thought the question didn't apply to me because I don't really do environmental justice work, but actually I do pull from a framework of mobility justice, which I think is quite similar. And as Dr. Bednar was mentioning, procedural justice is one of the issues that I'm mostly interested in, how we're working with communities, how we're engaging in this research from the very beginning of formulating our questions and building these relationships. And I think maybe that is done more frequently in planning. It's kind of a new thing for civil engineering, I would say. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be bringing that into the field.
If I one more question.
This is just a response to Dr. Borowski. Did I pronounce your last name correctly? Yeah, Mitigation. Okay. Because I totally resonated with, because I got my BS in civil engineering. I'm doing a PhD in systems engineering, so I totally resonated. Like, oh, bridges, that was it, that was the thing, and they got over it real quick. But I just wanted to really uplift what you were saying, and like mobility justice is part of environmental justice, more so because because the environment that is. People don't have access to transportation, and that does cause injustices, right? So I'm not sure if you know about Robert Bullard, Dr. Robert Bullard. He's the father of environmental justice. And he actually has a paper. I have to remember what the paper is about, but he talks about transportation inequalities. And I think that'd be very, very helpful to get to bring your work into the environmental justice space, because it belongs. So that's what I wanted to say.
Maybe I can just quickly, I guess, build off of your point. So I was recently at the HBCU Climate Change Conference. That was happens in New Orleans, and I feel like that this group, as you're continuing on your journey in scholarship, that you consider going to this conference. I think it's a special place to like meet the environmental justice elders, to bounce your ideas and your work off of like local communities, but also other folks that are in the field. And so it's an incredible space to really just understand like what the environmental justice work looks like, what climate justice is, what energy justice is, and how it truly is like where we live, where we work, where we play.
Thank you all so much. We have actually the Sal, Chris, you both come up here for a second. Oh. So we're gonna do
on bring people to actually see exactly pause cascading. So yeah. Get ready for a race.
Hello, everybody. We are not gonna have a break because we're gonna keep going. Next presentation. I was gonna say howdy right now, but I'm not. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Carlo Chunga Pizarro. I'm a UCI student in urban planning. I'm a loud and proud BAF fellow. Happy to introduce this upcoming panel that we're going to be focusing on wildfires. And the first presenter is Dr. Salvador Zárate. Take this class, Beyond Labor. So Dr. Salvador Zárate is a cultural and historical anthropologist in the Department of Anthropology, where his research examines effective and reproductive labor within U.S. ecological extractive economies. His recent research focuses on Latino residential gardeners and weed abatement fire mitigation workers. He grew up in Orange County and works with Latinx workers, occupational and community organizations.
Hello, everyone. Really nice. Okay, hear me? Yep. Right. Really great to be here. Share some of my work. This is very early stages of the new project, my second book project. So a lot of what you'll hear today are kind of initial kind of groundings in theory. I'll be discussing a little bit about my method and the methodological approach that I'm taking to the project. So it's kind of big picture today. It's also a ton of images. So I'm gonna do my best to kind of convey where the project is at currently and kind of where I'm beginning to engage with this work. Like Carlo said, I'm a cultural anthropologist. I'm also a labor historian and labor theorist. I'm really glad to be in such good company with everyone else in here. And again, welcome. Also, some of my undergraduate students are here, which is really great. So I'm like feeding two birds with one stone today. Going to teach to them, but also, share some of my research. So let's look at this image here. There's a house and it's teetering over the Chaparral. This is in Laguna Beach region. Generally we know that the Chaparral relies on fire to biologically reproduce. The fire regime should be, fire is expected to grow biologically or something between 30 to 100 years, but it can be different places. But this is kind of a pretty good depiction of what I'm beginning to call something like a suburban, like a canyon suburbanism, type of life in Southern California that is really putting a lot of value, social value, on living in the canyons. And for any of you who may have lived in Southern California, you also know that UCLA was almost evacuated in 1993 because of a big wildfire in Laguna Beach that happened on the same day as like the Malibu fires of 1993. So we're right here. Like this is practically where we're at. Here's another view of it. That's the ocean, the Pacific Ocean on the side. But you can see that some of it has been cleared off there, right? The hill, there's a little bit less shrubbery there. So the period of the year referred to as California's fire season, which has generally occurred in the summer and fall seasons, has grown by as much as 84 days since the 1980s. So it's really expanding how long this danger is like with us throughout the year. This has had significant implications for fire preparedness across the state. Just in 2018 alone, the California Fire Authority had to request an additional $244 million because they had already exhausted their budget, state budget of $442.8 million. And it wasn't even October yet when it's like really beginning to get dangerous, right? Since then we've had, 2020 was one of the most disruptive years on record, and the general trend is we're going to be seeing more fire, and it's going to be part of our lives in Southern California. But I kind of want to scale, pull the scale in a little bit and think a lot closer and think kind of with property today at different levels. But I want us to look at this image. This is an image. It's a very simplistic image in terms of the kind of safety zone around the house. You can see that around the house it should ideally be not, wooded. There should be more distance to flammable things like fuel, chaparral, and other things. In Orange County, what this means is for homes that are in the wildland-urban interface, homes like the ones I just showed you, homeowners who live out there will receive, primarily like in unincorporated areas, will receive a notice sometime in February or January telling them that they need to get their property weed abated, right? So someone needs to go in there, a contractor, people can hire private companies to do it for them, and they have to get it done by April 15th, right? Because it's a danger to the neighborhood, it's a danger to the region, and if you don't get it done, then the county will come in with a weed abatement program and they'll do it. And so, spoiler alert to like what I'll do a little later, but like my dad was the owner of that company. He had a contract with the County of Orange for like 3 decades, and I worked with him in the hills since I was like a little kid, right? Very shoestring operation, but like if you didn't get your house taken care of, my dad's crew would show up. If it was in the closer to the summer, I would show up. My 8-year-old self. So a lot of the things in Orange County that emerged from this period to protect homes really emerged out of a period of the 1970s when there were really kind of disruptive wildfires. And the weed abatement program was one such program that came out of that. And the goal is to remove non-native plants, really flammable plants, things like pampas grass, which if you've ever seen, they look like large feather duster, but like 12 of them stacked together in a nice little bundle. Incredibly flammable. And then any dried brush that is native needs to be removed. Well, so clearly I'm interested in the bigger picture, but today I want to share a little bit of what I've been kind of trying to unearth, so to speak, currently in my project, which is I use these 2 images. It's so great to teach with. So I get a kick out of doing it. But what do we see in this first image? What is it? We're just to describe it. What's going on?
Person putting out fire.
Person putting out
house.
the fire's like licking the roof, right? It's like right there. Right. I'm gonna show you a second picture. It's different, right? There's something going on here. Now, right, there's the idea that maybe there's things that have caught fire, shrubbery or trees or something. The second one, there's bigger distance there, right? I'm interested in this little squiggly line. Like all of my research at the moment exists there. Like I want to find out what is going on here, including, but especially, I guess, to say, the Latinx workers who were there months prior to the fire, but who are not in that picture any longer. Right. So this project is kind of like at times a kind of methodologically intimate project, because a lot of it is an unearthing of the kind of relationship my own family had to this economy, but also trying to find ways to speak about, how do I put it? I'm clearly not super interested, as part of my project, right, in the super affluent homeowners that, right, like it is part of the broader picture of Southern California, I understand that, but I think I'm more interested in the forms of vulnerability and life experiences and labor practices and knowledge of the Latinx workers who do this work, right? So it's kind of, I have to keep both in frame, because part of it is dealing with how property as a regime or as a logic in the US has a overtly racial character, right? And this includes exploitative labor, right, of migrant. So for now, property is kind of the placeholder here that I want to look at in relationship with like people's work and working lives. We always hear, right, like, oh, we might hear something like, no life lost, but like 20 structures were burned, right? So there's always like almost this equivalency done, or this kind of like, as if all those things were equatable. Okay, so this is a designer function on PowerPoint. It came up with this, and I thought it was really great. It's actually two different images. What you're looking at is a very blurry picture of mustard grass that is before, and then this kind of world within a world, second image of all the mustard grass cleared out. Right, so it just kind of wanted to be a visual representation of what the work actually looks like. And I want to think about how this creates a defensible space, right? It defends, however, it defends only particular groups. Latinx workers have no claim to the affluent geographies that they labor for, are in fact subjected to historical forms of enforced exclusion, limited mobility across the geographies of South Orange County. The part of the county you might see represented on TV shows like Real Housewives of Orange County or Arrested Development. This differs, right, quite starkly from the working class and diverse urban northern part of the county where the Latinx workers live, right? So I was really kind of moved by James's, I don't know if James is still here, but the kind of difference between East Austin and downtown. Kind of a similar logic here in Orange County. And I'm currently thinking through this form of Latinx labor, fire mitigation work, as a kind of ecological ward, right? That lasts. It's not magical or enchanted or autonomous in the absence of workers' physical presence, but it is otherworldly, right? It's migrant. A kind of overlay that overlaps histories of racial migration and settler colonization at the same time onto native land, right? So I'm trying to think through these concepts, and I would like to explore with you all how they come together with a little bit of a sneak peek of the ethnographic work that I've been doing, particularly last summer. So again, super early stages, right? And I want to think about what it means for Latinx workers to do fire mitigation work in a context that extends settler property claims of Southern Californians, and how we might use this example to think through the positionality of racialized dispossession and migration in the context of unceded native land. This is when I showed up to the field site of workers clearing out an area in Laguna Beach. This was kind of what they were working with. There's a machete in the clearing there. But they were there because there had just been a huge fire in Laguna Niguel, city next to Laguna Beach, that had burned a ton of structures, houses. So because of that, they called them to this place on Laguna Beach, which I won't tell you exactly where it is, because part of it is tied up with, when they showed up, they were going to do this clearing work. But in this site, in this canyon, there were 3 identified sites of cultural significance to Native communities. So they had to make sure that they wouldn't disturb them while they were doing the clearing work to protect the properties on the hill. But also, no one knew where they existed anymore because the maps that pointed to where were from the 1970s. There had not been another mapping project or archaeologists out there to try to find where they were currently at. And prior to that, there was no record of anyone clearing the site, so there may even be more. But when I got there, I met the crew. We're getting ready to do this work, who I spent time with over the summer. And I was talking to the foreman who was named Juan, and we'll call Juan. We're walking around the site and showing it to me, and I saw like a big ball of ivy, which usually crawls on surfaces or on the floor. And I thought it was kind of odd, and I asked him what that could possibly be, and he said, well, let me show you. He got his machete and started chopping at the ivy. It's a non-native invasive species. And underneath the ivy was a native shrub shriveled up and desiccated, literally serving as a kind of armature for the growth of this non-native plant. And I couldn't help but think that this was a kind of metonym, the chaparral, or something, right? And you might have a kind of feeling as to what, right? While being cautious to not equate native plants with native subjects, I think there was something there in terms of, right, the kind of positionality, kind of tenuous subject position that migrants hold in the kind of work that they were doing, right? The protecting of settler properties, but also on unceded native land. I couldn't help but think about what role Latinx fire mitigation workers had in this broader picture. One of the next things that I saw before they got started was they had the old map from the 1970s of the possible location of these 3 sites of significance. And there was a Tonga cultural monitor and a resource management specialist, archaeologist, who were trying to decipher them. They were trying to decipher this old document next to Juan, who was the worker, and he had his work map. And they were doing this type of thing. They were trying to create an overlay to see if the work map kind of like fit with the old map. And again, it was kind of this doubling, right? This idea that there are different worlds kind of overlapping on one another, right? The world of migrant laborers, and then the history and the kind of unceded, right, native land, and the ongoing significance of these sites to native communities. So in the end of the end of my time with them, they not only found the original sites, but they found an additional 5 cultural significance. Part of this goes back to the fact that the workers were able to use their ecological practices to clear the area and actually, identify these sites. But there was still something else, right? I think about this picture here, that they were doing this work at the same time that the kind of backdrop, they're building further into the chaparral, right? There was more property being built into that area. So there was a kind of tension there. The Tonga cultural monitor, who I'll call Mary, was elated that there were more cultural sites found because then they could be protected, but also deeply concerned because they were now more visible to the neighboring community who often partied in these sites, and they had to clear out beer bottles and all these other things. So there was a real kind of challenge there, or a tension, right, between finding these and the kind of protective work that the ecology invasive and including invasive was doing. But now by protecting the homes, these places became more vulnerable. So she didn't quite understand how to make sense of that feeling of, as she put it, feeling kind of exposed at that moment. So, I want to think of how we think through Latinx migrant and native land claims together. How do we think about how settlers and migrants map themselves onto indigenous land? And we can think of the map on map thing from earlier. Ethnic studies scholars have approached race and settler colonialism by theorizing a settler logic of elimination, which, quote, increases white property through the decimation of indigenous populations, end quote, alongside a settler logic of exclusion, which produces an alien labor force to, quote, to transform land into property, expand capitalist accumulation, and, quote, secure regimes of citizenship under a settler colonial mode of production driven by property logics of whiteness, end quote. And again, I'm thinking of James' wonderful presentation from earlier. And similarly, we can think of the way that managing fire risk, i.e. securing private property on unceded native land, a decision and directive that consumes more and more resources every year, is in fact a further consolidation of certain rights and resources for particular already property secured subjects. And we can think of the foundational concept of whiteness as property offered by legal scholar Cheryl Harris, and the research on the cultural logics, the backward cultural logics to wildfire prevention that Mike Davis proposed in his book chapter, right, in the early 90s or mid 90s, the case for letting Malibu burn. So again, those are kind of the gambits for thinking through theoretically the kind of research that I'm currently doing. But the last minute and a half that I have, I'm going to scroll through a couple images to kind of think about the method and the archive behind doing the work. As I said earlier, my family has a long history in this work. My dad had a very small company that did this, and this is literally what kind of secured our place in the US as undocumented children and then as migrants. But this is my parents' backyard. Before my father passed, he was building all these tiny little sheds and storing all his tools and like work documents. So when there were fires, I think it was 2019, I can't quite remember right now. I rushed to my parents' home to go to the civil shanty to open it up and see what was in there because I wanted to take stock of those documents. And what I found were really boring, really dry documents that my dad kept. They were just business contracts and checkbooks, like old stuff, stubs and stuff like that, old maps. I was like, okay, well, that wasn't terribly exciting. So then I made contact with someone who I practically grew up with, Carlo, Fire Authority, program for about 3 decades. And I asked if I could visit him. And I went to his office right before he retired. He tells me, open up the king door, that filing cabinet, and I want you to open the door. And I opened the top drawer and I popped in this image. And the gentleman with the sombrero in the middle was my father. And underneath that, there were more images. Again, my dad with a sombrero. This is in North Tustin. This is someone who I remember fondly, not directly related to me. This is a wench, and they're rolling it somewhere, and people are looking at it because they're looking at a homeboy here who's coming up with the wench who they've lowered into a canyon to secure this striper up and pull it up. Incredibly dangerous. I don't recommend for anyone to do this. But it's I've since talked to the old weed abatement manager as well, Jerry, on the site there. And then I'll show you 2 more images. This one of those individuals is my uncle who's passed. But you can see new development on top of it, right? And then this wonderful picture of someone looking directly into the camera, that gentleman wearing a red beret and the chaparral, probably 90-degree weather or something. So I wondered, why is it that the dry documents are my parents' house in Santa Ana, urban, northern part of Orange County, and then like my family history, my family photo album is sitting in like county offices. Right, and that's another thing, right? The method, I still don't know how to answer that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sal. Hi, I'm your host again. Ready to invite you to the next presenter. So we're gonna go all the way from the Department of Social Sciences to the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. I am happy to introduce your next speaker, Chris Olivares Martinez. Chris Olivares is an assistant professor at the University of California in the Department of Civil Engineering and Environmental Engineering, where he researches interactions between microorganisms and organic pollutants and how these interactions are impacted by wildland-urban interface fires and other climate change disasters. Chris obtained his PhD in environmental engineering and MA in French at the University of Arizona.
Thank you so much. So again, for the invitation, we're happy to share with you some of the research that we are starting here at UCI, and what a fantastic segue from Sal's presentation here before us. So we're looking at how wildfires impact water. When we think about the impact of fires, we often see the smoke, right? The impaired air quality, which absolutely is a very high concern. However, something that happens in fires is that usually there are water-related health concerns that can last months, can last years. And we're just trying to figure out what is the extent of these water concerns, especially in the area that, as Sal described, is called the wildland-urban interface, or this transition zone between homes and what environmental engineers like to call the natural environment and the built environment. All of this is a very large effort, and we have Cameron Daly here as our work. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of people to do this kind of work as very quickly learn. We have here President Elisa Morgan, who is getting her PhD in our department, as well as a fantastic group of undergraduate researchers. When we talk about fires, we usually imagine vegetation. Forestry people call them fuels. Think about grass, shrubs here. This picture I made when I was doing a postdoc in wildfires on the East Coast, but they were thinking about longleaf pines there. And you have this vegetation burning. As a consequence of burning these fuels, you form this pyrogenic or fire-impacted organic matter that gets released to waters. There's also release of nutrients. Trees are wonderful stores of carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, and that may have implications for a process called eutrophication, where you have the nutrients, and then you have a lot of algae starting to grow, and then the algae, as they decompose, they stimulate microorganisms in the water that start sucking out that oxygen, eating those delicious nutrients from the algae, and then making waters anoxic. And usually when we have an impacted stream by fire, we have the formation of what we call polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. They're usually charred or food-related chemicals. You have an example over there. You have all these things grouped together, and these are very well known for their health concerns in terms of causing cancer. And when you have a fire-impacted site, you have a storm, then all those materials in the carbon that is more erodible make their way into the water, forming a tea-like substance, a very high concentration of organic matter. However, we know that it's not just natural environment. We have a lot of the built environments of these human structures that we have, for example, water treatment. So maybe the water, if there's additional inputs of contaminants from fire going in, might require additional steps, additional chemicals, additional energy to clean that water. And then what if the fire reaches the site where these homes are present? So then there's all these consumer products that suddenly it's not just the forests, the vegetation, the chaparral that is being burnt, but now lots of plastic. So this brings us to our research side, which was a fire that happened, the coastal fire in summer of 2021. And this is very close to Laguna Niguel and the Elisa Creek. And this was an area that was burned for 7 days, about 200 acres. And there were 20 structures, homes that were destroyed. As you can see from the picture, It looks a little bit like what Sal just presented, but this is a very affluent area, right? You see all the type of homes that are being destroyed, and maybe the people that are living in these homes, they have the resources to rebuild on their own or without much assistance. But nevertheless, those burned plastics or household components make their way when you have a storm that flushes into the Elisa Creek that is just next to it, and we discharges into the ocean. You see here a picture, these are all from the Los Angeles Times, LA Times, and have usually for fires, there's these pictures of airplanes with this red coat, red dyed sand that is a fire suppressant, and it's mostly phosphorus. We were very interested in looking at the storms after the fire. Usually the first storm after a fire is very critical because that's where things are going to be very easy to be flushed away. So we were monitoring every red dot. It was someone from our team going out and sample, and a very fancy sampling technique, we put a bucket from pull it back up. And then we performed carbon and nutrient analysis, chemical extraction to identify these soot-related chemicals, as well as we were interested into looking at who was there in terms of microorganisms, primarily bacteria and archaea. What we saw is that, like we expected during the first storms, you see all these increases in of carbon that is discharged. But even though that very first rain happened in September 10, more or less, it was very small. It was enough to have a very noticeable spike in that organic carbon. And we also have releases of phosphate, probably related to that red coated sand that we just saw. Not only that, but from the chemical perspective, we see the formation of these polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons that get flushed out, and some different types of them in all these sites when we start having this first storm. So that was well because we know that these are fire-produced contaminants get flushed eventually into the ocean. I wanted to see if that was connected with the microbial community that was present in the surface water. And there were microbes that were responding to that need for food. Microbes are very versatile, have many different environments where they can thrive, they can eat pollutants. Constantly amazed by them. So we started seeing that there were several different types of bacterial genera that were increasing their relative numbers after the storm, especially those microbes that are able, have been documented to break down these soot-like compounds. So that was very exciting. And then, well, that's so great, like we mentioned, but what about other fuel sources that are not just the vegetation, things that we have at homes? So these are living up to the question, what about other chemicals that we use day to day? And day to day, we use thousands of household hazardous chemicals that may end up in a landfill. If they're burned, they may become more leachable. We know that we use lots of plastics, so many of the findings from a recent National Academies of Science, Engineering and Medicine found out that there's a lot of plastics probably out there from this burning. So I'm currently interested in these highly fluorinated chemicals as well as brominated flame retardants that coat many of the homes we use today. And we're starting to analyze and figure out, see the trends when we have this first storm, again, this blue bracket, flushing out these highly fluorinated chemicals. So as a take-home message, we see that storms can flush, discharge chemicals, contaminants, but also that microbe that can break down these charged contaminants can be stimulated, and maybe it's maybe some microbial promise to engineering solutions. But there's also additional hope. These are two pictures that we took. My partner is in the audience doing a walk in the area, and this is November, so a few months right after the fire. And then this is a year later, May 2023, after the fire happened. There were fire mitigation workers that were applying these fire controls, sitting with native plants, and see that it's a very short period of time. It looks so different. And an environment like the one pictured at the bottom is less likely to flush a lot of these chemicals into the stream that flow into the canyon and eventually into the ocean. With that, I'd like to say thank you, especially the site is in the ancestral lands of the Chunga and Ashman peoples, that literally Elisa Creek is located in that area, as well as where we are here at UCI. And here at the bottom is a picture of the discharge, the beach of the discharge. This is of today, so the beach is really beautiful. So thank you, and yeah, thank you for your attention.
But it's so now we're gonna go all the way to UCLA to hear a presentation from Dr. Yue Li, named Global Fire Response to Heat Waves. Dr. Yue Li is an assistant professor in the Department of Geography at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. Before joining UCLA, he was a postdoctoral scholar in the Earth System Science at the University of California, Irvine. And Yue earned a PhD in physical geography from Peking University in 2019. It has published articles in ecohydrology, climate feedback, land use, forests, carbon cycle, and Earth system modeling. He is currently working on climate extremes such as heat waves and their interactions with wildfires, both in California and across the globe. Yue has been awarded for being one of the high-cited researchers, 1%, by Clarivate in 2021 and 2022, and he won the Andrew Slater Award granted by the National Center for Atmospheric Research in 2021 for best performance in the Land Model Group meeting.
Very nice introduction. So, I know it's been a long day right now, so I like everyone just take a couple of seconds to stretch your arm, you know? It's almost the end. Okay, just relax. Okay. Okay, so yeah, I really enjoyed all the presentations today. And also you see my institute is the UCLA Geography Department. Actually, I just started this position 2 days ago. Before that, I was a postdoc here at UC-Urban and also spent all my 4-year postdoc life at UC-Urban. Also, here I list a couple of labels. These are my labels. So just think about these labels, you know, for my self-reflection these days, like first gen international scholar and also early career scientist during the pandemic. Anyway, so I figured out like today, like we have like many like PhD students and also some early career scientists here. So I've listed some of the strategies I use over the past couple of days. I mean, it turns out it just applied to myself, but also I figure I can always share some things to everybody, right? So just in case, like you find this would be very helpful tips. Again, you know, from my experience, like I've experienced like a huge like mindset change because like life here is completely different from what I used to live, and also you know, try to get a lot of like mentors because I don't know a lot of things, right? Just to admit that this is the fact, and also I really believe like, you know, for successful or like you know, some satisfying PhD career, you really need to seek different mentors from different areas, right? Rather than just your own advisor. And also I list this like reach out means like, you know, if you have like any difficulties, you have any questions, just try to reach out to people, you know, reach out to your advisor, reach out to your peer, reach out to your cohort, because like always talk to people because different people may have solutions for your problems. And the last thing is like just to try to, you know, every your task done, you know, without any delay, because like you don't have to be perfect, but you know, just to try to finish before the deadline. Sorry. Okay, so for research, mostly I'm a physical geographer, so I'm very interested in climate change, how we can connect the climate warming with the, you know, hazard like fire, like heat waves. And also these are, I just want to show you, I actually have a video here. So these you can see, so when the 2020 river fire happened, it turned out I have it on a boat near the Monterey Bay. So I took this video so you can see the smoke fire far away from the river. All these smokes can reach as high as the very top of the troposphere. And also for the map here shows the shows the black carbon, which is mostly from the carbon smoke. You can see the transport by the atmospheric circulations from California in the western US all the way being transported into the east coast. So the fire is dangerous and also is, and also probably some of you may remember early this year, the Canadian fires, the smoke has been transported all the way to the New York City, right? So the fires, is really bad, okay? And also, okay, so today I'm talking about like two topics, the heat waves and also the fires. And the heat wave, we know, like, especially during the summer, I appreciate the previous presenters to say, about the heat wave and people's exposure on the extremely hot days. And also, these are some fire happening in the neighborhood here. In 2020, there's a Silverado fire happening in the north of Irvine. And also, we know these fires directly threaten our neighborhood, our housing, all of this, and also the smoke I have shown. These smokes can go all the way to the top of the troposphere and also be transported, across the whole continent. Of course, it's really hard to directly link these two heat waves and also the fires together. Why? Because I've listed the factors influence the fire behavior. So the heat wave, representing in a background of climate warming is just some climate factors, temperature, humidity, and also atmospheric dryness, the VDD, the lightning, wind speed. These are all kind of factors. But also the fire's behavior, how the fire spread, also is influenced by specifically the fuse, like different plant types, and also if this fuse is dry or not, and also it depends on the amount and also the continuity, and also the topographic factors like elevation, slope, and aspect. These are all influence the fires, right? So this will kind of explain why there's an inconsistency between the heat wave and also the fire trend happening over the past several decades. So on the left-hand side, you can see these are global trend of the heat wave events. So you can see, especially over the past several decades, this is for the global and also for everywhere, because driving by the temperature increase or the heat wave globally and regionally, they all increase. But on the right-hand side, if you look at these are actually the fires from our satellites. So you can see the trend, globally you can see the temporal trend is all like the general, you can see most areas showing like a blue trend. So the blue means like the fire, the burn area is actually declining. So apparently if we are expecting like increased heat wave, but we are not actually observing an increased burn area globally, right? So this kind of is different from what we saw, because the heat wave is kind of provide really dry and also provide really sometimes accompanied with drought. So these conditions actually favor the spread of the wildfire, the ignition of these fires. So I'm curious about my research question here is like, actually globally, like how many and how big are these fires in response to the heat wave across the globe? So based on the previous figures, apparently we cannot directly compare the heat wave trend with the fire trend, right? So what's the reason? So because if we are looking at the annual trend, means all the temperature data, all the fire data are average across the whole year, right? So which means if we look at in the annual trend, so these are at the annual scale. So the heat wave usually happens from days to a couple of weeks, so which happen during a very short time period. And also, so to address these questions, we really need to use some daily scale temperature data and also daily scale fire data from the satellite observations. So this is a map I draw from the temperature data, the daily temperature data, and try to capture all the historical heat wave all in different regions across the globe. So you can see on the top left, so it's the 2010, the Eastern Europe heat wave. So the color red to almost dark red means the heat wave mean duration. And also the 2015, there's a drought and also heat wave in the Amazonia basin. And here, the end of 2019, 2020, there's a very dangerous Australia bushfire. And actually during that time, the whole Australia experienced like a heat wave heat. And also these are the 2021, which is really close, just 2 years ago, the Pacific West heat wave, and especially in the British Columbia. And for these small like inserted plot, actually I'm plotting the satellite fire data on the map. So you can see from a climate scale, right? So these big area heat wave, but some the fire is actually is kind of unevenly distributed for these regions, and also but maybe each of these fires are pretty dangerous for us, right? So the daily fire data, so is actually also I use this from the satellite data. So I'm introducing you this global fire atlas data developed by my colleagues from NASA. So this data is based on the remote sensing data, the satellite data, and also is public available. So I'll show you some details of this data. So on the website, on the GFAP Global Fire Atlas data, so you can actually explore. It tries based on the satellite estimates to identify every fire on Earth, based if we can see them from the satellite. So you can go to this website just to explore the data to see how each data, because this my colleagues have developed like an algorithm to track each of the individual fires, how it grows, and along with the days. Okay, so just a very brief illustration of my approach here. So since we have the daily scale temperature data, we have the daily scale fire data, right? So for each region, you can see in reality, the data are all in like a pixel level. So which means like could be 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. So these are illustration of these like first day, second day, third day, and fourth day. And also for these colored pixels, we have these are identified as the heat waves. Of course, based on the fire ignition location, we can locate each fire into different pixels. So if we just make a count, based on the temperature data and also the fire data, right? So we can count how many days, like for example, all the pixels. So how many pixels are non-heat wave? So the number is 88.1. So how many pixels like this red and also the yellow pixels, how many of them are the heat wave pixels? So the number is 3.9 for each fire season. So because heat wave is kind of like extreme, so usually it happens in a very rare conditions, means the temperature goes beyond like a 95th percentile, right? So naturally, if we count these pixels, the non-heat wave pixels can be much more, the number can be much larger than the heat wave pixels, right? So the same, we can count the fires during the heat wave pixel or during the non-heat wave pixels. So we can also count like so many like non-heat wave fires on the right, and also you can see the heat wave fires on the heat wave fires also on the right, as the number is 1698. But if we do like a ratio between the fire and also these pixel numbers, so we can try to normalize the fire behavior either during the heat wave events or for the non-heat wave events. So you can see even naturally the non-heat wave pixels and fires are kind of like dominant across the region. So that's the reason why we are not seeing like an increased burn area along with the warming. But if we do these normalizations, you can see, so for per day, the heat wave caused the fire rates has been amplified. So this region the heat wave has amplified the fire rates by a ratio of 5.5. So this is actually a real number for the northwest of the United States, mostly are the Alaska region. So we can actually try to map this amplification ratio on the map. So for the first column, constant row is the fire number, how many fires. The second is the final fire size, which means the average size of different fires. And if we multiply these two, we get the final burn area, which is the variable we are very familiar. So you can see the color here, if the color is larger than 1, which means, the more red you see, means the heat wave is like has a higher amplification capability of the fire for the burn area. So if you look at the global map here for the burn area, so you can see almost all the boreal regions are heat wave, I kind of like a fire hotspot in response to the heat wave. And also we see, in the Western US, is also a hotspot is where we are. And also in the Mediterranean regions, some hotspot in the Amazon, North Amazon, West Amazon, in the Africa, and also in the Southeast Australia. These are, we actually all observe the dangerous fires from our like if we see from some reports from news, we all can see some examples of that. So the satellite or the observation support, actually support our report and also support what we saw from the news. And also, especially for the boreal region, so I can like select all the different boreal regions: Northwest North America, East Siberia, Russia Arctic, and also the Russia Far East. So I just want to see how the fire evolved with the days of the heat wave, because along with the increase of the heat wave, sometimes if the heat wave lasts for a long time, is it dangerous, more dangerous for us, for example, to threaten our housing or even to increase the difficulty of our firefighters, right? So for all the boreal region, you can see from the first day of the heat wave to the next week of the heat wave evolution, these all boreal forests, the fire number has, you can see, almost increased exponentially with the heat number there, which means if you like, for example, for the like Alaska regions in the 6 days, you can see there's a fire number there, and just 1 or 2 days later, if this heat wave lasts, the fire number can greatly increase. So we're hoping to use this observational sensitivity to provide implication for decision making, but right now this is kind of like very theory work, so we can actually try to improve our understanding of how the actual satellite fire in our world they evolve with the heat wave increase. And also, I like to highlight some work from my colleagues at UCLA. So these are new satellite data. It's called the Fire Events Data Suite Phase. So this data set is really good for capturing the active fire every 12 hours, which means it can track the growth of the fire. So this on the right is the images from NASA. They use my colleagues' data to show how this active fire data can in the Canada this year, past the summer. Yeah, Audrey Alderwood is a PhD student in my postdoc lab. So Audrey is going to defend her thesis very soon, and she has this recent very cool paper published in Environmental Research Later. So she actually is the person who tracked the smoke from the fire. So which is super cool because you can see the instrument here. I don't know the name of this, but I would actually track the smoke from the fire. So for this paper, it's from the 2021 KNP complex fire. So what Audrey did is to track the smoke to measure the PM 2.5, the methane, the carbon monoxide, and also the carbon isotope. So and also based on this chemical analysis, she can estimate, okay, for the KNP complex fire, the mean fuel age is about 40 years, which means this can give us some implication for how we should manage the wildfire. Should we do some prescribed fire, to burn some of the old branches? So which is super cool work. Okay, so this is my last slide. So just ignore all the text just to show you, there's one message. The heat wave, from the observations like temperature, like fire, the only one question is like, although the burn area from fire globally is declining over the past decades, but the heat wave is actually fueling the fires. It doesn't matter how these fire together to increase or decrease, because each fire of them can be so dangerous for the human society. Okay, I'll stop here and take some.
Great, thank you. All right, I feel like everybody probably wants to get up and stretch your legs a bit, so we're gonna make a slight change to the schedule. We actually need to be out of this room because there's another reservation in here at 4 o'clock. So we're gonna transition to room 1310, which is where most of you have been grabbing food and stuff throughout the day. So, but we're gonna actually have a chance to ask questions of the 3 speakers in the latest panel after a 15-minute break. So if folks could clean up all your stuff out of this room, and we will get started over in 1310 in about 15 minutes. And for those folks who are on Zoom, we're gonna shut it down, but we'll restart it again here shortly. Thank you.